I would like to now welcome to the imaginAviation stage NASA's TACP Program Manager, Dr. John Kowalowski, and Joby Aviation's Head of Air Operations and People, an Olympic athlete, Bonny Simi, as they discuss the power and pitfalls of innovation in the aviation space. John, I'll turn it over to you to give a proper welcome to our guest, and I'll come back on a little later to field some questions for both of you.
Steve, thanks a lot. And please welcome back to everyone. Steve laid out such a great day yesterday. I'm glad so many of you have returned for what's going to be a great day today. And again, really excited to join you all, but join you all with a very fascinating conversation with a fascinating innovator, Bonny Simi, Head of Air Operations and People at Joby. So good morning, Bonny.
And good morning.
And just thanks for joining us this morning. Chat about your successes and challenges. In the many different ways you've built innovative teams over the course of your career. As we talked earlier, in getting ready for this session, you shared with us a bit of your story. I thought that was so incredibly compelling. Can you take a few minutes now and kind of walk us through your journey, your story? I know the audience would love to hear it.
Sure. And I note that in part of this session throughout the day, there's conversations about dreaming and for the kids, dreaming of the future. And I think when I think of NASA when I was a kid, people would think about becoming an astronaut, and kids do dream those. And although the odds of becoming an astronaut as a kid are very small, I bet if you actually asked the test pilots at NASA and astronauts if they dreamed of it as a kid, they probably did. And that was how it was for me as a youngster. I had a small list of dreams. I won't call them goals. I'll call them dreams because they were pretty audacious. I wanted to become a pilot. Now, when I was young, the number of female airline pilots was smaller than the number of astronauts. So it was really quite an audacious goal. I wanted to be in the Olympics. And it happened to be an Olympic year, and I was watching it on ABC TV. So I said I wanted to be a TV commentator for ABC, and I wanted to go to good school for engineering. So when I looked back on that, I went to Stanford and studied engineering. And in my freshman year, I saw an advertisement for being a torchbearer for the Olympics. And I thought, I should try that. So I wrote an essay. I was accepted, and I carried the torch up to Lake Placid. And watched the Olympics. I saw the sport of luge in person, and I said, I need to do that. They happened to have a kids, so I did it. And 4 years later, I ended up in the Olympics. I did that for 3 times, and then also did bobsled, and then retired, and followed the other part of my dream. I was gradually building my flight experience, and was hired as a pilot at United. Had that dream job. Spent over a decade, and then there was a startup called JetBlue, and the innovation that they were talking about, I just wanted to be part of it. So I did what airline pilots typically do not do, and I left my pretty senior captain job, and I went to a junior first officer position to be part of something new. Worked my way up, did a variety of management roles in operations and at HR. And taught the foundations of innovation. So when the CEO asked me to think about the future for JetBlue and how might the company stay innovative, because at that point the company was almost 20 years old as I had moved, because I'd been there for quite some time. And I said, we need to be part of the ecosystem of startups. And I said, one of the examples would be, I believe that electric propulsion and hydrogen propulsion after that will fundamentally change aviation, just like jet propulsion did back in the 60s. And he said, well, how would you go about doing that? I said, we should set up a corporate venture arm. So he said, great. Sometimes you have, careful when you raise your hand and say, hey, here's an idea. You might get asked to go implement it, right? So about 5 years ago, a little more than 5 years, about 6 years ago, I came out to Silicon Valley, set up the venture arm for JetBlue. We invested in a whole variety of startups. But I kept coming back to my personal thesis about the future of aviation. And I really felt that electric propulsion, hydrogen was still a ways off, but I really felt that battery density was getting there. So we did a broad scope, and we came across a startup. At the time, there were only 50 people. It was Joby Aviation, which is building electric vertical takeoff and landing. And here you have a picture of the aircraft. This is, I saw it before it was at this phase, but now you can see this is what it actually looks like now, where it takes off vertically like a helicopter, and the nacelles transition forward into forward flight. And it is in, I still remember when I first saw it, it was more about how I heard it. It's so incredibly quiet. In fact, we recently did a study with NASA to validate how quiet it is. And one of the reasons is because, of course, it is transitioning over on its wing-borne flight. So this is where I invested in the company when JetBlue did. I was on the board, and about 2 years ago was asked to come in-house to join the team, to help build out our operations, to help scale the company. When I first started, it was 50, then it was 500 when I joined the team, and now 1,500. So that's kind of the journey, in just a couple of minutes, John. So over to you.
Great, Bonnie, that was fabulous. And again, part of the excitement that we felt we were talking to you about a week or so ago with all this. And what struck us, again, as we were talking, and even now, is you took quite a bit of risk in your career. You took risk in terms of the things that you decided to move to, and frankly, even in the way that you have assembled teams to pursue some of these dreams that you brought people together on. How do you see that in your personal risk posture? And what did that allow you to do in terms of building innovative teams?
Yeah. So it's true. People would look at, using this idea of jumping into like the sport of luge and say, oh, Bob said, oh my goodness, that's risky. And actually, it's a very safe sport. The data will set you free. Very few accidents in that sport. Of course, when I started, I didn't realize that, but I do have an adventurous streak. And I think there's, in some sense, a difference between one's personal risk profile and maybe an organizational risk profile.
Mm-hmm.
And so probably the biggest risk for me was in my entire career was leaving United for JetBlue, a very established airline, seniority. I had the golden ticket to go to this startup. Everybody thought it was crazy. But, I just felt that being part of something new and different really keeps me, excited. And so I have that risk profile. But then as I joined JetBlue and we started building organizations and teams in a variety of different cool programs that we had, the way we looked at it was if you brought in a variety of people, again, if we think, following on that risk profile, but I'll also build it on just building different teams, is bringing people in. Some, especially in a heavily regulated industry, especially when you're thinking safety, you have to have those who've been there, done that, seen what happens. But as you're discussing these new innovation and ideas, bringing in the fresh people who don't have those hurdles, it gets back to, why is it that kids have to be the ones that have the dreams? Because the kids don't know what obstacles are in front of them. And when we get older, we say, well, yeah, I'd like to do that, but I can't because kids don't think that way. And it's the same thing for innovators, and it's the same thing for teams. So I would bring teams together from different disciplines, different ages. It's amazing what happens when you mix people who have enormous amounts of experience with some of the young folks, whether they be interns or fresh out of college. Yes, the young folks are learning from mentored, if you will, by the senior. But actually, in today's day and age, it's the other way around in many cases, because people, whether it's technology, whether it's new things, the younger generation does adapt much quicker. So that's how I've kind of looked at it. And then, for me personally, I always, again, as a safety professional as well, as I'll map out all the risks and I'll figure out how can I mitigate them. And usually, for people, it's I can't do that because of a financial, it's hard. I can't, earn enough money or whatever it may be. But if you maintain a not very high lifestyle, then it's easy to make those kinds of changes.
Wow. Yeah, so I love that story and the way that you spoke to the value of diversity in terms of being able to attack so many of the challenges that, frankly, you don't always know going in to a particular endeavor. And And I know one of the things that we talked about earlier is in your time at JetBlue, back 2007 or so, a significant service disruption while you were there, and I think you had a very, at least at the time, what felt like a novel approach to solving that, which to me speaks to the way that you look at diversity and the value of identifying it and including it in. Can you say a little bit more about how that worked?
Sure. Let me set the stage. So this was 2007, and it actually, unfortunately, happened recently to another airline in December, where there was a system meltdown, if you will, and that happened to JetBlue in 2007, where our crew systems had a bit of a meltdown, and it was because of a weather and a variety of things. And although the weather improved, our operation didn't, and it took about a week and to sort of put all the pieces back together again. It was a very defining moment in the company. There was changes of leadership, big money consultants were brought in, and there were some changes that were made. But at the time, I was a pilot, just a pilot, if you will, and I was looking at this and thinking, I know some pieces of this that they're not thinking of. And so put together a proposal to bring together what I call the wisdom of the crowds. And especially in an operational setting, if you're someone in that fairly high ranks of a company, you may have lost touch what is actually happening out in the front line. And when disruptions and mishaps happen, it's as we all know, it's a chain, right? It's a chain of events of many different things have to go wrong for things to happen, and any one person might stop it. Well, it's the same thing on a large irregular operation, or IROP as we call it. The dispatchers, the pilots, the gate agents, the reservations, they have a piece of it, and they know that there's something that they could do, but how can they be empowered? And so we actually brought together a group of 200 frontline people. The highest you could be was a supervisor. And we taught them some design thinking processes. We taught them just some different ways of thinking in terms of innovation. And then we asked them to map out what is their life 24 hours before a weather disruption and 24 hours after, just a continuum. And what are all the steps they have, and what are all the problems they see in those steps? So the steps were a yellow Post-it and the problems were a pink Post-it. Let's just say there were a lot more pink Post-its than yellow Post-its. And we gathered all those challenges. There were 1,000. We bucketed them into themes.
Yeah.
And we came up with 100 projects that those teams came up with ideas and suggestions. It was a 9-month project. We completely overhauled the operation. We're empowered all the way from the CEO. And from then on, those major disruptions have not been as much of an issue. We had Hurricane Sandy, we had Snowmageddon in the east, and a whole bunch of these major disruptions since then that have not been as much of a challenge. And again, it comes back to thinking for the weather. And when I think of some of the challenges at NASA as well, or any large organization, is think about the frontline engineers, think about the technicians. They bring such amazing ideas to the table of how one can improve.
Yeah, wisdom is found at every level of every organization. No, that's fabulous. And that's actually, I love the way you thought about the diversity and the inclusion in that respect. Part of our conversation also, going back a little while ago, we talked sustainability. And that's another term that, that it means different things to different people. I mean, there's certainly the environmental, there's technical, but there are organizational sustainability opportunities.
Yes.
It seems to me that part of what you were talking about just a moment ago leads to a sustainable, innovative organization if you're able to extract wisdom from all levels on a continual basis. How did you see that working out long term?
Yes, very much so. In fact, we had set up a philosophy at JetBlue, because at one point I was overseeing all of our talent. So think of it, all the hiring, recruiting, performance management, organizational development, that sort of thing. And it wasn't a hard and fast rule, but it was something that we monitored, where it was sort of an 80-20, where 80% of leadership positions would be filled from within, 20% externally. Now, a lot of organization, it is much higher than that. So, 90, almost 100% filled from within. That's great for the people from within, but you then get to be stuck in the way you've always done it before.
Yeah.
And the flip is a challenge too. If you only hire, or if you're more than 50% external hires, it's hard to keep the culture, what's good about the company, if there's just so much change. And so by bringing in that 20%, it brought in new and fresh ideas and kept us challenging how we were thinking. And we also did that, from as you know, I'll talk a little bit about that sustainability over the course of time. As they came in, it would help us. The main body of the organization would keep the best of the culture of the company. And I think, at JetBlue and now at Joby, it's both companies known very, very much for the culture. And so it keeps the best while challenging some of those challenging assumptions. I also come back to and that again makes the company sustainable. It allows you to work through downturns. I mean, think about the airline industry has so many different downturns, and those companies that are agile and can move quickly tend to survive much longer. I do want to add one other piece because it's something I'm quite passionate about. And when we think about building organizational teams and aviation, I'll come back to my life as a pilot, because I did spend 30 years as an airline pilot, and also was in charge of pilot hiring. And when we think of diversity, people think of, you need to bring in X% of women and all different. I actually look at it very, very differently. A cockpit is safer in the flight deck if people come from even different disciplines. And so, and studies have shown this, right? So you can, if the flight deck is, say, 2 Air Force pilots, they kind of grew up through the same system. But what if one was an Air Force pilot and one was a Navy pilot? Slightly different ways of thinking. It's the same thing of whether you have a military pilot and a civilian pilot, or maybe one that came from the regionals and one that came from corporate. So airlines now and are very much doing that mixing and matching. And when I think of a lot of the teams, and perhaps as NASA, as you're pulling together various teams, bringing in people from just different disciplines. Think about diversity not just as the gender and race and all that. Think of it as your background and what perspectives you bring to the table.
Yeah, no, that's incredible and so important. Again, there's so many different ways we can look at that diversity, and you just highlighted some value that we don't want to lose track of. Mm-hmm. So one kind of last area to explore in a handful of minutes we've got left here. Listening to you talk about all the different things you've taken on. We talked about risk posture, personal risk posture, but frankly, it speaks to characteristics in my mind of flexibility, agility. Mm-hmm. That needs to be mapped organizationally into the kinds of insurance that the good parts of the culture that an organization builds. You don't want to be throwing them out every few years as you think flexibility is where you need to go and pivots. But your thoughts, perhaps, because I mean, this is really key to NASA. We've been around for 100 years, right? We've got a very, very strong culture. We appreciate that emerging industries, such as you represented, Joby, are changing the way we may need to think. How do you see the value, the importance of that balance, flexibility, agility with our, with what's good about what we've been doing for so long?
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to get back to that kind of where we started, where, I say you have to have a dream for a dream to come true. And why is it that it's just kids that dream? And because, as we get older, we think of all the obstacles, why we can't do something. And that's where that flexibility piece comes in. And so regardless of what age you are and how long you've been in an organization, thinking about your own over the next 5 years, if there were no obstacles and you were guaranteed to succeed, what would your life be in 5 years? And that the same thing, organizationally, and that is what will NASA achieve in 5 years if you were guaranteed to succeed and there were no obstacles. Now, of course, there's obstacles, but it allows you to frame it. There's a reason why the word vision is something that you can see. People need to see that. Once you see it,
Mhm.
it then
Mhm.
allows you to kind of energizes and it allows you to think. So even the background that you have, I see the eVTOLs flying around the city. This will happen. Yes, there's obstacles, but it allows you to then lean into things and think, how might we do X, Y, Z? Which allows for a little bit more flexibility in how you're bringing in what it, and when the obstacles pop up, how can I think organizationally about bringing new ideas to solve those challenges? Is it somebody from a different department? Let's, if everyone has been working together for quite some time, bring in someone else simply to be part of the conversation, a little bit of red teaming, if you will.
Yeah.
This is how we can come up with great solutions to these challenges. And honestly, when it comes to the space that I'm in now with eVTOLs, we all have to be thinking differently because this is a fundamental shift. And I'll come back to electric propulsion and then hydrogen will change aviation for the better.
Wow. Bonnie, I've had such fun with this conversation, but what I would like to do now, though, is opening up Steve. Can you come on board here? Talk to us a little bit, or ask us a little bit about what's coming up in Conferences IO, or any question that you may have.
Yeah, this has been a wonderful conversation, Bonnie. Thank you so much. You've mentioned organizational culture several times, and it's something that's dear to my heart and a lot of people watching here today. But can you talk about the challenges of maybe building innovative teams that are risk tolerant? The teams could be very risk tolerant and want to jump to it, but building those teams within an organization that may have a little more risk averseness to them. Either the organization is more risk averse, or the industry is. Obviously, in the industry we're talking about, how do you compensate for that?
Sure. I think that, first of all, regulations are in place for a reason. They are to keep us safe. And I think whether we're innovating in eVTOLs or electric propulsion, hydrogen, whatever it may be, is thinking about and really understanding the basis of the regulations so that you know kind of where your frameworks are. And if is a path to change them, understand what that path is rather than just come up with crazy ideas that are just going to hit a wall. That can be demoralizing for people, right? And but to think, so bringing in people who are the experts and understand the why these regulations are the way they are, and how might we safely work through the path and experiment. So for us, we do quite a bit of partnership with the Department of Defense in different areas because it allows us to be a little bit more flexible. So we can operate and fly our aircraft. For us, operating our aircraft remotely initially through our flight test program, the way we're doing that, it is so much more safe. It allows us to push the boundaries and test. And as quite frankly, some of the regulations are still being written for our space. And how are they being written? They're being written because companies like us are out there testing and are out there providing input to these regulations because we've been living it now for years. And so this is where working together with new entrants, new ideas, along with and partner with the regulators to make a safe operation.
That's great. And John, you see that as well within not only TACP, but all of aeronautics. The balance between researchers or projects or programs that want to stretch the boundary a little more, and yet the need to really be very, very secure and responsible with public dollars. How have you seen and how have you managed some of that balance too within the organization?
Yeah. So at the programming right now, TACP, we tend to look at that farther term future and the art of the possible. But where I was for a better part of 15 years or so before is running airspace operations and safety. Our critical government partner was FAA. We worked with all airlines. And with labor in terms of bringing in new advances, decision support tools, and advancements in how things can be done more safely. So what I appreciate very much the importance of bringing in, again, the wisdom from folks who have done this all before, but finding that path with these innovations, ways to be able to communicate that, to demonstrate our interest in value and shared values around around the safety culture and assistance, and the importance from an airline perspective as well in terms of efficiencies, right? I mean, it is a business. It's a business where safety is clearly first, but they want to be operating more efficiently. These are all things that we have to work very collaboratively across that entire community. So very, very important. Not all of NASA's portfolio should be directed that way, which is why the program I'm in now, looking to find that next portfolio element, is critical. But the relationships with our stakeholders, industry, airlines, and FAA, so critical to being real and making things happen, to Bonnie's point.
Yeah, I think that's where it gets into that. And, as somebody who has admired NASA from a distance, and I've always thought of NASA as that organization that does help. That vision is, what is that future? Because you're always thinking about, what might it come next? And then in our space now, tapping into the industry to help us think through those as well. So when we partner with NASA, for example, when we did for our sound study recently,
right,
we look at you as somebody, we're bringing a different voice to the table. And just then you think of us as bringing us as a different voice to the table. That's where you have this win-win scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Steve, I'm not hearing you.
Oh, sorry. The partnerships, the innovative opportunities, the agility. You mentioned agility, and Bonnie, you specifically said agile organizations last longer. What brings you to that conclusion? What experiences have you had to lead you to that conclusion?
Yes, and when I say agile, there's an agile organization is made up of agile individuals. And this is for all the people here, in the audience, and thinking about, how do you lean in? What are those things that you were thinking, gee, I could do that? And then why do I say, no, I can't? Why not? Lean in and begin testing your own boundaries. That then helps the organization test boundaries. It is so easy for us to get comfortable. And I don't care where you are in an organization, there are some risks that you personally can take that will help benefit the organization. So thinking through and leaning in, which collectively helps make the organization better. So for me personally, I was often the one. It's the same, when we were in a discussion about JetBlue and how, after 20 years, we were coming up on the 20-year anniversary, and JetBlue was known as a very innovative company, but we found ourselves kind of doing some of the same things. And the idea is, well, how might we be different? And really spent a day thinking through that. And that's how the idea of setting up a venture capital firm came up, is through that idea. Now, for me personally, I was like, all right, well, if somebody's going to do it, it might as well be me. And I will tell you, I knew a lot about the aviation industry. I'd worked in a lot of different roles. I grew up in the Bay Area, so I grew up in, quote, Silicon Valley, the heart of Silicon Valley, but I did not know venture capital. So, all right, I will learn it. And only had 1 or 2 degrees of separation. For a lot of people who knew all the ins and outs, spent some time at Stanford talking to professors, just leaned in, and we felt our success as an organization would be, we'd make some good investments, we'd help change the industry, we would still be around in 5 years, because corporate venture often fades. Not only is JetBlue Venture still around, it thrived even through COVID and is out back again making great investments. And so it, and a lot of the ideas that we found through those startups, right? We weren't investing necessarily to make lots of money, although it has done well for the company, but it was more about finding new ideas. It's those entrepreneurs who have these great ideas who then come in, and we've changed how we think about revenue management, changed how we think about in system operations and weather predictions and a variety of other tools that came from those innovators. So we were literally having a seat at the table. And so when I think about the innovation challenges that NASA may have, or partners with, those are the entrepreneurs, whether they're internal entrepreneurs or external entrepreneurs, are a great way for us to bring new ideas forward.
Beautiful. Bonnie, now we've got just another few seconds left here, but I want to foot stomp you that last point here that you're just making. And you talked about agility in terms of the workforce and leaning in, like, as you did with with JetBlue Ventures, kind of say, I might as well do it, right? That's great, and we need people that are going to be able to take those chances. But we also need an organization that makes it safe for people to do that. That they're going to be valued, and will everything go right? Maybe not, but that the organization accepts that and wants to hear from those agile innovators to make the company better. So yes, we've got great innovators here, but at the management level, the senior leadership level, we got to allow for an environment that lets them lean in, and that's kind of our challenge here going forward. So Steve, hey, thanks for leading this last section here, bringing in some ideas. I know we got to move on in our agenda here, but Bonnie, this was a tremendous way to start off day 2. Thank you so much for your insights. Really appreciate you sharing that all with us today.
Thank you. And, you have to, I'm going to come back to my last statement. You have to have a dream for a dream to come true. And, what's your dream? And I can tell you my dream is exactly what I see over your shoulder there, that we will be flying our aircraft through the cities in the next 5 years. And I'm really looking forward to that.
Wonderful. Bonnie, thank you. Steve, thank you. imaginAviation team, back to you.